My Hero Academia has become incredibly popular, a popularity that is still soaring and is rapidly reaching escape velocity. In the near future, it may well explode outward into the anime fandom, transcending the boundaries of length and popularity to become equal to one of the big three. And the fact that it is being presented by Studio Bones as individual seasons as opposed to a long-running shonen, it's actually been catching the attention of a lot of people who don't typically watch those sorts of long-running shows. I could talk more about why I think Hero Aka is doing so well, but suffice it to say for now that it is being talked about by a hell of a lot of people. But despite the amount it's been talked about, there is one aspect of the show that I feel isn't getting much, or maybe not any, attention in the wider anime community. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. Welcome one and all, I am Coriander Stone, and today I wanted to talk a bit about disability and spoon theory in My Hero Academia. Now you're probably asking yourself, what the heck is spoon theory and what does it have to do with a show that clearly isn't a cooking anime? And I'll get to that in a second. But first I want to go back to the beginning of my premise and explain, well, the premise of this video. The disability part. That is to say, what disability has to do with My Hero Academia. Because that's another thing you're probably questioning. You're probably saying to yourself, well, I don't remember any characters who are deaf or blind or in wheelchairs or have a missing limb or have any sort of chronic illness or terminal illness, nothing like that. So what has disability got to do with it? Well, hypothetical audience member, I'm glad you asked. Let's take a step back and get a little bit technical here, shall we? According to the ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, a person with a disability is defined as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantively limits one or more major life activities. Now I want to take a second and combine this with the social model of disability. The social model of disability is essentially the idea that people with disabilities are only disabled because the rest of the society around them has whatever ability that they lack. For a good example of this, let's look at Gallaudet University, the college for deaf students in Washington, D.C. In Gallaudet, everyone is deaf, and everything is suited to that idea. In other words, everything from the signposts to the classes themselves are structured around the idea that everyone in that community is deaf, and that ASL, or American Sign Language, is the primary means of communication for all of the students. Within the walls of Gallaudet, deafness ceases to be a disability under the ADA's definition because it does not in any way impair any of the students there from participating fully in that environment. However, out in the rest of the world, deafness is considered a disability because the rest of the world can hear, and the world itself is built around the idea that people can hear. So why the hell am I throwing all this different disability terminology at you, and what the hell does this have to do with anime, specifically My Hero Academia? Simple, I'm trying to use a combination of the social model of disability and the ADA definition of disability to prove that in My Hero Academia's world, being quirkless is a disability. That almost everyone in the entire population has a quirk is part of the assumption made by the people in the world of My Hero Academia. Everyone's quirks are different, sure, but they're all an essential part of how people function and, as a whole, how society functions. We know that Hero Aka's society has evolved to rely on quirks because of the whole hero-villain system that we are thrown into in the story. Quirks are essentially a physical characteristic. I mean, sure, there are people who look, well, normal, like Uraraka and Bakugo, but they're actually in the minority compared to all the other people around them with crazy physical traits. Look at Sue's tongue, or the motors in Ida's legs, for example. Whether or not a person in this society has a quirk that's obviously visible, they still rely on that quirk as part of their body. In the second season, Gran Torino even goes as far as to teach Deku that quirks are an extension of one's body, and the reason that Deku is having so much trouble with One For All is precisely because he's not using it that way. So for all intents and purposes, being quirkless in the society of Hero Aka fits under both the ADA definition of disability as well as under the social model. So what's with all the build-up and what am I working toward? Well, after proving to you that Deku is in fact disabled, I wanted to talk about that for a little bit. See, disability representation in anime is kind of lousy, especially considering that most disabled people are stuck in a wheelchair and poor pitiful people who rely on others, and their one big wish is to not be in a wheelchair anymore. And sure, there is definitely a reliance component to disability, and sure, there are lots of people who are disabled who wish desperately not to be, but that's still a stereotype, and I'll talk about it in another video. For right now, Deku, and what he represents, that is to say that he is positive representation of a disabled person within anime, and I just find that super cool. But I want to go back to what I said at the beginning. Disability and spoon theory, and you're still probably wondering what kitchen cutlery has to do with Deku, anime, or Hiroaka. And the answer is, well, an explanation of spoon theory. See, while there's a reasonably good chance that it was unintentional, Hiroaka still does an amazing job of rendering spoon theory into a format that's understandable and that anyone can relate to. It shows how spoon theory works on a practical day-to-day basis, and so I really wanted to take some time to explore that. And I'm thinking that most of you are getting pretty tired of listening to me talk about utensils without explaining what the heck I'm on about. So here it is. Spoon theory is essentially the concept or idea that a person with a disability has a limited amount of energy, therefore a limited amount of things they can do in a day. That limit is probably a lot lower than that of a normal able-bodied person, and so they are always working around that limit. The emphasis of that limit is that it is finite. So you're probably wondering what the heck this idea of finite energy and disability has to do with, well, spoons. And I could explain it, but that would take a while, and that's really not the focus of this video. The history of spoon theory is definitely pretty fun, and I encourage you to go look it up. It's a real thing. Trust me. It really is. I know it sounds made up, but it's a thing disabled people use all over the world, and it's real. It exists. See? It even has t-shirts. Still don't fully understand the concept of spoon theory? Well, that's alright. I didn't do a great job explaining it, because it's hard to explain without giving its backstory, but I'm about to apply it to My Hero Academia, and that should make it a lot clearer. Oh, first, before I go on, I should clarify, while I've been talking all about Deku and his disability, he's not the only disabled person in this show. All Might is also very clearly disabled. I just didn't really talk about him before because I was proving Deku's disability, and I don't need to prove All Might's because it's obvious that he has a physical handicap, i.e. that hole in his stomach. And both of these two one-for-all users are perfect examples of spoon theory. Let's start with All Might. As we know, All Might can only be in his symbol of peace form for a small number of hours a day. In other words, he only has a limited number of spoons. When he forces his body to function at full power or full energy, outside of that number, when he tries, for example, to take down Nomu even though he's already exhausted himself for the day, there are real repercussions for that. After that fight, he can only hold his ability for even less time than he could before. All Might is getting weaker and weaker, partly because of his injury, but also partly because he's not resting his body. Every time he uses his other form, and every time he uses his quirk for an extended amount of time, he weakens his body significantly because he's pushing it too far and too hard. He's attempting to ignore the rules of spoon theory and disability, and in so doing, is doing lasting damage to his body. Now let's look at Deku. Deku is disabled in that he doesn't have a quirk. Then he's given a quirk. But that doesn't actually mean the removal of his disability. Think of One for All like a prosthetic leg. Yes, it allows him to get up and move and walk around again, but at the same time it's still not the same as having his own legs, and therefore it taxes his body in ways just walking normally wouldn't. Deku has a finite number of spoons, that is to say he has a finite number of times he can use One for All in a given period. And every time he uses it, he pushes his body harder than his body is meant to be pushed, thereby breaking his limbs. Think about his match with Todoroki. Think about the entire UA Sports Festival. In the first round, Deku knows that he should not use his quirk because he can only use it a certain number of times, and that using it now, i.e. using up his spoons now, means that he won't be able to function because he'll have used them all up, and therefore his body won't respond like he wants it to for the rest of the tournament. He finds a way to accommodate himself and work around it, getting through the entire first round without once using his quirk. In the second round, he does everything physically possible not to use One for All for the same reason, but in the third round, when he's facing Todoroki, he has no choice. Every time he uses his ability, every time he pushes his body harder than he should, there is a physical response, i.e. his broken fingers. At the same time, he only has so many times he can pull that trick. Even if it is hurting him, it's still within the limit of his spoons, and once he pushes himself too far, once he breaks all his fingers, he's out of tricks and can't fight back anymore. After fighting Todoroki, Recovery Girl tells Deku that his fingers won't fully heal, that they probably will never be fully healed, and that it'll be a reminder to him not to pull stupid stunts like that again. But the point is that just going beyond his spoon limit, pushing his body harder than it's meant to be pushed, isn't just a thing you can nap and work off. It's permanent, it's finite, and it can do real damage. Pushing yourself too hard is dangerous, and that's kind of the point that's made here, and also the point that's made with spoon theory. Later on, Gran Torino teaches Deku that he always needs to be using One For All, but to do it at 10 or maybe 30% of its full capacity. In other words, this low amount of energy is something Deku can do, and something that he can sustain, because it's well within his limits. But he can't use the higher levels of it yet, because that pushes it too hard. He has enough spoons for the lower levels, but not for the higher ones. Sure, that could change in the future, but at least for right now, he's in a place where using full-powered One For All breaks bones and puts him right back in his unable to do anything after one blow state, with the added bonus of permanent injury. Moving way back to the beginning of Hiroaka, in the UA entrance exam, when Deku uses One For All on that giant robot, and has to fall back to Earth, Deku's in a bit of a plight. He's used up all of his spoons fighting that one robot, using them all on one punch because he didn't yet know not to put all of his energy into one motion. So now he's falling and he's going to go splat on the concrete. Point is, just because he still wants to keep going, once he's out of spoons, that's it. There's no way his body will move and respond and do what he wants, even if he might want it to. And if Uraraka hadn't been there to help him with zero gravity, he really would have gone splat. Spoon theory is all about the use of energy. It's the idea that a person with a disability has only a finite amount of energy, say 5 spoons today, 4 spoons tomorrow, etc., etc. That doing a thing, or taking an action, costs a spoon, or maybe, in the case of Deku hitting something with full force for One For All, it costs a lot of spoons, as many spoons as he has. It's an issue that isn't held by people who were born with a quirk. Todoroki, Ida, Bakugo, and Uraraka are all perfectly capable of getting tired or getting worn out. I mean, just look at the fight between Bakugo and Uraraka. But it's different. They're not in danger of damaging their body in the same way, and they can push a lot farther than Deku can simply because their quirks are a part of their bodies, and therefore they don't risk damaging them every time they use their quirk. They don't have a finite number of spoons or of uses. They can keep on using their quirk until they get tired, and like with Uraraka in the tournament arc, using their quirk until exhaustion has no consequences for them, except they're tired and need to rest for a little bit. So by this point, I'm hoping you all have a pretty good idea of what spoon theory is and how it works. Obviously, its application gets a bit more complicated out in the real world with all its different disabilities, limitations, and challenges, but I really love the way Hiroaka so truly embodies the core ideas behind spoon theory and disability, and I thought it was high time that someone talk about that. Now, I hope you enjoyed the first installment of my new pet project, that is, this series on anime and disability. I'm not going to be doing them all at once like I did with the Ruby videos, so I'm just going to be adding to this playlist occasionally. The amount I add to it and the frequency with which I add will probably depend on the reception that this video gets. So if you like this sort of thing, or enjoyed this video, or want me to make more, please like and let me know down in the comments. Also, if you want to see when I post more of this sort of video, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you can check out my channel anytime and be up to date on what I'm posting. This is Coriander Stone, and I thank you for watching.